Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webcast, Get Your Game On, Gamification and Wellness. I'm Sarah Hunt, Education and Engagement Coordinator for the Corporate Health and Wellness Association. One of the biggest challenges for employers implementing wellness programs these days is employee engagement and creating fun, motivating activities to drive outcomes. We're excited to bring you an excellent and very timely webcast regarding the growing trend of employers using gaming to execute a successful employee wellness strategy. Today's presentation is brought to you in partnership with the Corporate Health and Wellness Association and ShapeUp. I'd like to begin today's presentation by welcoming each of our presenters. Megan Oates-Zaleski, she's the VP of Marketing at ShapeUp. Scott Pashley, he's the VP of Channel Partnerships at ShapeUp, and Jack Brown, the VP of Product Management at ShapeUp. The first expert I'd like to introduce is Scott Pashley, who will kick off today's webcast.
So that we have an understanding of what we mean by gamification. So it's very different from what you might think, and it's more prevalent than you probably think. And maybe the most common example is one of the least effective examples, which is the Employee of the Month program. So it's fairly one-dimensional, it's everywhere, it's ubiquitous, but it's not very effective. And despite that, this guy is doing his best to win the coveted prize of Employee of the Month. But we'll talk about some more effective ways to use gamification. And it's far more widespread than you think, but I do think it helps to understand, sort of step back from what you may think of as gaming, which is about entertainment, but and it's sort of a generational thing. So I used to think of gaming in one way, but then there's a whole other way that employers and health insurers are looking at it. So my career started at the right young age of about 12, and my wellness career was started by gamification in a whole different context. And I tell this so that we can think of it in the right way, but when I was about 12, my younger brother and father went away on a business trip to Gettysburg overnight, and I thought that my brother Sean was overweight. He was overweight, and it was in my mind because he was gaming. So he was playing Nintendo way too much. He wasn't outside and playing. So I thought I would help him out. And I sold his Nintendo unit and all of his games to a kid down the block. So I was proud of myself. I thought I solved all of our family problems in one fell swoop. My parents and brother and dad, when they arrived home, didn't quite see it that way and made me go and get the gaming unit back. And in my defense, I had given the money to my brother, all of it as well. But I had to give all that money back and get his gaming unit back. So that was my exposure to sort of wellness and gaming, but thankfully it's a whole different world now. And not only in the health and wellness field are we using gaming in ways that are extremely productive and driving the right kind of behaviors, but we're probably even a little bit behind the rest of corporate America and the world when it comes to employing games and gamification to drive the behaviors in the workplace and initiatives that are desired. So let's start with the definition here so we can understand. Gamification, as we're going to speak of it here, and as employers across the world use it, it's not in an entertainment setting. It's designed and extremely effective, actually, in driving initiatives and behaviors in achieving business objectives. And Gartner predicted that by the end of 2014, 70% of the Fortune 2000 companies will employ gamification in one form or fashion. And to us here in the United States, it's nothing new. It's widely accepted. And 67% of U.S. households engage in gaming already online, so they're open to it and they are desirous of engaging in it inside of the workplace as well. So let's look at some of the things that make it so unique and effective. On the top of that list really is the fact that the gaming model and game mechanics appeal to multiple different personality types. It appeals to the person who wants to collaborate. And as an employer, of course, you want collaboration amongst your employees as well. It also applies to that person who's driven by competition, who likes to win. And then third here is something that we'll talk quite a bit about through this presentation, and it's the ability to demonstrate and gain mastery and status, which is a central component to this. And it's been around for a long time. So let's look at some common examples of how companies have been using gamification for years and years. And one example that immediately comes to mind is more of a consumer play, and it's loyalty programs. So we're all probably part of one or two loyalty programs, and some of us probably many more, where we buy goods from a provider that we like, and we get points and discounts and such. And it's just as prevalent in the workplace, but we might not think of it. But look at sales leaderboards, which have been around probably as long as the modern workplace has been around. Look at days without injury boards inside of factory and manufacturing settings, and even the flight simulator, which enables people to train much less expensively and much more safely to perform tasks that they're going to be asked to do in real life that come with real risk or have a certain skill level that they need to achieve. But for today's purposes, I think the ideal example is Cisco. Cisco's got 60,000 people around the world who are helping out when it comes to customer service and product assistance, and even a little bit research and development and product development. And interestingly, only about half of these people are actually employed and receiving any compensation financially from Cisco. So how do you do that? How do you get 30,000 people to be a voluntary workforce for a giant for-profit company? Well, it's all about mastery and status. So they get little icons and badges and thumbs up from other users inside of communities that help them gain status and display their mastery. And it's extremely powerful. So what is it about people that makes them want to do free work, zero compensation? Chances are that most of these people have real jobs, and before you jump to the conclusion that the folks doing the Cisco tech stuff are young guys, IT folks who never turn the lights on, live in their mom's basement, and are sustained on a steady diet of Cheetos, don't, because this is far from the only example. But we here at ShapeUp try to stay on top of scholarly research, and Daniel Pink is at the head of a group doing some really interesting stuff when it comes to behavioral economics. And in his book Drive, he focuses on two different forms of motivation that in our realm, in the employee health and wellness field, are also sort of popular terms and are fairly well understood. But let's take a deeper dive into extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. It's really interesting what he discovered by looking at reams and reams and reams of research when it comes to why intrinsic motivation is much more sustainable, long-lasting, and powerful than extrinsic motivation. And this example of extrinsic motivation will ring a bell for many people on this call, and it's paying somebody $500 to do a health risk assessment or to do a biometric screening. That's what Pink refers to as a low cognitive load action. So something that's sort of transactional and easy to do, and you'll take the money and you'll do it. But it's much harder and much less effective to extrinsically motivate somebody to take red flags, for instance, from a biometric test where they have cholesterol issues or blood pressure issues, and pay them to do the hard things to change that behavior. It's even counterproductive, according to a lot of studies, to even offer that out to them. So what do? So we know that we can extrinsically motivate people to do simple things, but how do we get them to do the hard things? Well, the key, according to Daniel Pink, is to find a way to intrinsically motivate them. So to do high cognitive load things that take real effort, real thought, real motivation, you need to build this intrinsic motivation and light a fire within them. And he's laid out three components, one or all of which should be part of an effective plan to move people in an intrinsic manner to engage. The first is autonomy, which is pretty simply put, it's allow people to do things on their terms. So give them guidelines, give them a goal, don't get in their way, don't be big brotherish, and let them control their own fate to a certain extent. And we've already talked about mastery, which is the number two component that you see here. Right? So this is allowing a person to actually achieve something and display it. And the third is purpose. And purpose could be something really, really grand. It could be that, you're going to walk across the country for cancer or diabetes, Or it could be that you have a purpose now because you're part of a wellness challenge and you're on a team and you don't want to let your team down. You have a beginning and an end and you want to win. So it could be as simple as that. So now that we have an understanding of what motivates people, how do we actually get them to move? And we're going to touch on another behaviorist's view here, which is the BJ Fogg model. And we've done some work with him to make our programs more effective. And he includes motivation as a component of his model, but he has a couple other things. He has ability as well as a trigger. So just to give you an example, a very simple example here is you're at a red light. You want to get somewhere. So you're highly motivated. Now your ability is just fine too. Your right foot's working and you can stomp on the gas and you can go. Your trigger is very simple in that case. It's a green light. So everything is in place, and that's a real low-level example. But let's take another example from something that we just spoke about in biometric screening. So chances are that a person's not all that highly motivated to get their finger pricked. So motivation is low. Ability is probably high. A vendor has set this up properly, and it's easy for them to attend, and they go and do it. Now, the problem is if one or both of these things, motivation or ability, are low, then your trigger and your trigger trajectory has to be further out, right? You've got to pay them. That's the $500 example. So that's a glance into the BJ Fogg model, but let's take a look at another part of his equation here. People are sometimes more motivated than they are at other times to actually engage in programming. And how do we reach them at a high point? Because that's when we're most likely to get their buy-in and their engagement. So the key here is intrinsic motivation again. So when a person or people are intrinsically motivated, your employee population or your member population as an insurance company are motivated to do the things that you want them to do, then they're going to have more highs here where when you hit them, they're going to click and engage and buy in. But from there, if they're extrinsically motivated or the program is extrinsically motivated, meaning that it's a company mandate or an insurance mandate, you're much less likely to have very many of those high peaks. So the way to get those high peaks, as this model demonstrates, is to have social norms. And this is where we talk about company culture. So if you have the right company culture in place and people are eating healthy, they're engaged in challenges, they're turning meetings into walking meetings because they want to win as a team, that's social norms, right? So that is the cultural component of this. And if you have that, then people begin to comply, and it becomes hard to be that new employee who doesn't comply. And that's where you see more peaks happening because you've instilled a culture where that's the expected norm. And gamification is a means to achieving that, whereas financial incentives and company mandates sort of feel like you're forcing them to do those things, and they're less likely to be motivated to actually do that. Let's take another look at what a really large company has done to gamify initiatives that they've used financial resources for in the past and financial incentives and hasn't really worked. So Ford rolled out the Ford Fusion around the world, and they have a massive challenge when they do these kind of rollouts in that they've got to get people on board and on the same page from Cleveland to Cairo. How do you get dealership employees to learn about the product and engage? What they did is they gamified it. So they allowed people to take their own Ford Fusion, put it in their own garage, and then through engaging in certain learning modules, they were able to get badges to put on their car. And by interacting with other people inside of the system, other employees from around the world, and answering questions, they were able to get trophies and such. So zero financial incentive here. But what happened is 100,000 unique visitors in the first week, and by week 5, user interaction had doubled. And the bottom line is this drove the behaviors they wanted. They saw increases in customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, and collaboration, and the most important metric, as I see it and as they saw it, sales. So how do we do what Ford and Cisco have done? How do we apply it to our world, to the health and wellness and employee population and insured population world? Well, that leads me naturally to Shakespeare. So there are 63 known spellings from contemporaries of Shakespeare throughout history. So looking back at history, 63 people who lived in his time spelled his name 63 different ways, none of which were S-H-A-K-E-S-P-E-A-R-E. And even more interestingly, there are 6 known signatures for Shakespeare, none of which are S-H-A-K-E-S-P-E-A-R-E. So this is just an example of how misperception can become reality. And we have our own example here in the wellness world of how misperception can become reality. And I think a good example here is that participation and engagement are terms that have become interchangeable, but really shouldn't be. They have vastly different ramifications. Participation is one and done, right? So participation is programs that you have to do. And the characteristics here are, I'm sorry, this is a little whited out, shouldn't be, but it's that they are transactional, meaning that they're one and done. They're static, right? So it's data, and unless you do something with that data, it's not going to change anybody's life. So it's not going to change your insured population or your employee population lives. And it's extrinsic when it comes to motivation. And examples of these programs are health risk assessments, biometric screenings, and in some cases, health coaching. So all these programs are extremely valuable, critical to building a successful wellness program, but they are transactional in nature. Health coaching can be even more valuable, but the case I'm talking about here is sort of where, okay, so you had some red flags in a biometric screening. Now what I want you to do is attend 3 sessions and you're done. That's a bit too transactional to really intrinsically motivate a person in a lot of cases to make that behavioral change. Whereas engaging programs are ongoing. They're dynamic, and they're quite often programs that are able to instill intrinsic motivation. And when I talk about these programs, what I mean is activity tracking programs, challenges, and social wellness programs in particular, and we're going to touch on those. But really, what this is about is they view programs, this is the employee population and insured populations, in 2 ways. Programs that you have to do, sort of like death and taxes, or programs that you want to do, like challenges and fun and engaging programs that can often lead to really positive outcomes. So to dig a little further into this, let's take a look at what happens when companies in our space, and I think this happens more in the health and wellness space than it does in really large manufacturing type settings. For instance, Ford and Cisco embrace gamification, whereas we sometimes hear, we have clinical outcomes-based style programs, and that's all that really counts. Well, unfortunately, I think that companies can get caught in this cycle of assess, stratify, and target, where what's happening is they are doing their assessments and they're targeting the unhealthy population primarily, or in some cases only. And this is sort of the mandatory D. Eddington slide that belongs in any good wellness presentation. And what he did is he looked at year 1 versus year 3 of these programs that focused on disease management as sort of the primary driver of the program. And what they found is that ultimately what happens is, while these programs are effective for the people who they engage, what happens is you sort of ignore the healthy population, and your at-risk population, your high-risk population ends up growing. It grew from 10.8 to 12.1% in this study. And even your middle population grows. And your healthiest employees, because of the natural aging process, and if we don't engage people and they're not engaged in healthy lifestyle decisions, they don't naturally become healthier. That's not the way that we move if we think of this as a wellness continuum with high risk on the left and low risk on the right. And to further illustrate what happens here, you can see that we've got, as you move along the continuum, you can move, and unfortunately this isn't rendering right, but you got to get the idea. You can actually move people along the wellness continuum. Disease management works for those people who are targeted. You're going to move a bunch of these people in the right direction along this continuum. What we've got to prevent is the majority of employees moving the wrong way. So to further look at this, what we did is we had polled the about 500 middle market companies, and what we found is that they had responded that when we asked one question, so in one sentence, how would you summarize your wellness program? And unfortunately, what came of it was that not effective was the number one answer, although there were a lot of positive answers as well. We further segmented this by looking at groups who said that disease management and health risk assessment and biometric screenings were their primary drivers of their program. And what we found was pretty revealing. 50% of those groups said that their program was not effective, and only roughly 10 to 13% said that that knowledge of individuals' health concerns was enhanced. Well, then when we looked a little bit deeper at groups who said that health challenges were a primary driver of their program, what they said was that on a much lower level, so only 10% said the program wasn't effective. 30%, as opposed to the other groups that said 0%, stated that they had a high level of improved culture. So, yeah, norm here is 17%. For groups who said that their primary wellness focus was biometric screening, health risk assessment, and disease management, they were down at 0 to 10%. Well, groups who did health challenges were all the way up to 30%. And interestingly, better awareness amongst the entire group, 16% responded that increased awareness of health risks was an outcome. 10 to 13% of the people who engaged in health risk assessment and biometric screening said that it was. A much higher percentage, 20%, of companies who had health challenges as a central component of their program said that better awareness was an outcome. So as we look at what works and what doesn't work, obviously the message is that you need a really well-rounded program, but engagement seems to be a missing component. So let's look at how somebody else, some really smart folks up at MIT, define engagement. So there's a new science that they are running out of a lab up there called the Media Lab, run by Dr. Alex Pentland, called social physics. So what they do is they look at how individuals and groups influence each other. And what they found is pretty amazing. But here's how they define engagement. Engagement is social learning, usually within peer groups, that typically leads to the development of behavioral norms and social pressures to enforce those norms. So again, we're talking about creating a culture amongst your employees and your insured population. And it sort of begs the question of, well, what are your employees learning from each other? Chances are that it's probably not entirely healthy, at least not all the time. And just to give you an example, so an insured population is much larger, but an employee population is sort of a microcosm. I was giving this presentation in Arizona at a conference live, and the night before I had met a guy from my hometown, Philadelphia, and we're separated by 5 or 6 years, and he lives on the other side of the city, so we're separated by millions of people. And we got to talking about how as we both grew up, we took mass transit to school. And we are outliers in that we are both in one piece, actually, so that's interesting. But more interestingly, the conversation led to, okay, so you took SEPTA, and then it led to weather and how the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic has just gotten killed this winter. And we started talking about, you know, I asked him, when you were a kid, did you used to, when it really snowed, run out and jump and grab on the back of a SEPTA bus and let it drag you for blocks? And he immediately responded, yeah, bumper hopping. So that just goes to show how things spread. We called it the same thing. He was a little older than me. He was from another side of the city, but we had learned that somehow. So that started somewhere and spread out. So the bottom line and sort of the moral of that story is that we have to teach people how to do the right behaviors, and they're going to learn from each other. Social behaviors spread almost like rumors do in a workplace. So we've got to take actions to actually get people to learn what are the right, healthy style behaviors. And here is a really impressive quote that came out of the studies that they've done there. And I can talk kind of fast as a sales guy, but I'm going to slow down here for you for this one because I think it's pretty profound. So this is a quote from a recent book by Alex Pentland called Social Physics, and he says, the effects of exposure to peer behaviors are roughly the same size as the influence of genes on behavior or IQ on academic performance. So think about that for a second. The social interactions inside of a workplace, for instance, are equally as powerful as your genes are on how you're going to behave. So as we look to have a culture of wellness and to have an effective wellness program, picture a new employee walking into your workplace or your client's workplace and looking around. If they're in a setting where there are challenges going on, and like I mentioned earlier, people are doing walking meetings or people are eating salads as opposed to junk food, they have social pressure and there's social learning that goes on where they connect that, okay, this is what I need to be doing inside of this setting. So I think that gives a deeper understanding through some really smart people at MIT on what exactly is a culture of health and how does it impact people. Another study from MIT, from another doctor here, Damon Santola, was really interesting, and it shows that things like a social wellness program, or any wellness program, come to think of that, can become sort of viral. And here's how it happens. They did this study that proved out and showed that if 2 of your colleagues are in a wellness program, you're 15% more likely to jump into that wellness program as well. If 3 of your colleagues are in a wellness program, you're 30% more likely. And if 4 of your colleagues are in a wellness program, you're 40% more likely to engage in that program. So this just goes to show how you look around, and when you may not have opted into a program initially, you're not an early adopter. At some point, when it becomes sort of the norm for your environment, you're much more likely to get pulled in and remain inside of that program. And now effective programs sort of crowdsource in the way that we saw Cisco crowdsourcing activities. So inside of your insured population or inside of your employee population, there are means to this. And this is just one way that we do it, for instance. So as an example, Gail here can challenge colleagues, or I can challenge Gail to do behaviors that sort of wouldn't naturally happen inside of the workplace. And it changes conversation. So I can challenge Gail to do this today. I could challenge her to move it to a walking meeting or other activities that we haven't, we're commonly interested in, or randomized healthy behaviors. I can challenge her to do those on a daily basis, just today, next week. So there are a few things that this does. Number one, it crowdsources actions so that internal administrators don't constantly have to develop new programming and are always challenged to come up with new ideas to keep people engaged. But number two, it means continuous engagement. So there are times when people are really excited because there are quarterly challenges or bigger challenges going on, but initiatives like this can mean that there's less of a lull because people can continuously engage each other in peer-to-peer healthy actions. So, now, one of the great things about challenge programs, and I think this really pertains more to social wellness than anything else, is that it can go viral. We polled about 20,000 people last year, and the results are amazing. 75% of the respondents said that they joined the ShapeUp program because they were invited by a colleague. So what that says is that 1 or 2 emails from HR weren't necessarily enough to inspire these people to take action. But once colleagues invited them to they opted in to the program. So interestingly, there's a lot of research from MIT and other places that say a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's peer-driven as opposed to a top-down kind of initiative. Another part of it is it's a multiplier of the marketing effort of a wellness program. So you get these 2 emails, from HR, which are often enough, especially for early adopters and people that are really into wellness. But a lot of other people sort of, okay, they see those, but they begin to pay attention when 1, 2, 3, 4 of their colleagues invite them to take part in the program. And once they're in the program, there was another really interesting point, and I love this point. It's that 80% of the respondents said that they were more likely to participate in other wellness programs from their employer or insurer because of the ShapeUp program. So they bought in, they got excited, hopefully became intrinsically motivated, but they engaged in a program and it built a certain level of trust to the point where they're now more open to your other wellness initiatives. 72% of the employees said that ShapeUp is the first wellness program that they had done. And look, we all know, because we're in this space, it's probably impossible, right? There's a good chance that these people had done health risk assessments, that they had done biometric screenings, but that they didn't view them as wellness, sort of hearkening back to that should do or must do versus want to do. They view those other programs probably not necessarily as wellness, but as things they had to do either to avoid a stick or to attain a carrot. And we're happy to say that 95% of the respondents reported that they were satisfied with the program. So as we look at wellness programs, essentially any program that is worth its salt has to be effective. And to that end, there have been 5 peer-reviewed studies done on ShapeUp users to look at the efficacy of the program and of social wellness in general. So Dr. Rena Wing from Brown University is a world-renowned diabetes expert, and she had begun to hear about ShapeUp and their early successes in Providence while they were a nonprofit, and she was hearing from companies about how great it was working, and she was initially a skeptic. So she put it to the test, and with some very promising and interesting results that you can see on the screen here. And now, 7 years later and 5 studies later, we actually have all this data available, and we encourage you to go and look at these studies at shapeup.com where they're available. But the outcomes are impressive when it comes to both weight loss and BMI reduction. So through peer-reviewed journals, we've proven that social wellness programs, including ShapeUp, work. So that leads us to the case study where it actually did work. So KeyBank is one of the largest financial institutions in the United States. They're a Cleveland, Ohio-based company with 15,000 employees, and they partnered with ShapeUp because they wanted higher engagement. They wanted to drive down healthcare costs. So nothing new there, right? That's what most people are looking to do, and they achieved that. But aside from that, they achieved a whole lot of cultural things that they found extremely promising and impressive, and they were happy about. Things like salads running out in the cafeteria, people being more active, people being excited, water cooler conversations changing from happy hour and what are you doing and are you going there to what team are you on and where are you guys placed. But the bottom line is that it works. So they started with 2,000 employees as a pilot group, and they had 33% engagement. 11% of that pilot group lost 10 pounds or more during the pilot program. And when they rolled this thing out, when they rolled ShapeUp out to their entire employee population, they had higher engagement than they'd ever had in any program. So 56% engagement, over 9,000 employees engaged in this social wellness and challenge platform. 90% of those reported at the end of the program that they had high satisfaction with it. So not only was it the most engaging and highest participation program, but it was their highest satisfaction program ever. Over the 12-month period, KeyBank employees lost as a population 14,737 pounds and well over 2,300 BMI points. And this is a stat that I think sort of harkens back to groups who say, well, we only do clinical things because we have to target that highest risk population. Well, 33% of their highest risk employees engaged in the ShapeUp program. So as we look at all that stuff and how gamification works in a manufacturing setting, in a wellness setting, what is the future of gamification? Where is it going? And this is a question that I probably get asked more than anything. And there's a challenge, and I sort of mentioned this earlier, that we in the health and wellness field might be a little bit behind in a certain sense to where large companies like Ford and Cisco are. And we are driving change here, but among the problems are that 73% of the people in the United States use social media. Only 27% of wellness programs employ social media. So there's a disconnect between how people engage in everything else in their life and how employers and insurers are allowing them to engage in wellness. 75% of adults own a smartphone. Only 17% of employers employ mobile technology in their wellness efforts. So again, we're not necessarily allowing people to engage how they would normally engage in everything else when it comes to wellness. We're sort of erecting barriers rather than knocking barriers down for them. 56% of Americans own some form of health or fitness device. Only 16% of employers offer them in a corporate wellness program. So again, we're a little bit behind the times, but here at least we are doing a bunch of things to change that and make progress. And what I'm going to do now is actually invite our VP of Product Development, Jack Brown, in to give you a little bit of insight into how we see the world and how mobile is extremely critical to our mission and to wellness in general.
So thank you, Scott. This will give you a little break while I chat here, and I appreciate it. Scott knows my affinity to this space, the mobile health ecosystem. But right now I'm going to start by doing a little social gamification. We all know on this webinar that a sedentary lifestyle is death. So I'm going to ask you all to step up, to stand up wherever you are. Not certain if you're sitting down or if you're standing right now, but I encourage you to stand up and go ahead and stretch out, relax, and just get out of that sitting pose right now. And I'll talk a little bit about the mobile health ecosystem. So, what's important here is we are right at the brink of technology on smartphones meeting commonality, where everyone has one of these devices. And, a good example of the technology is the M7 chip in your 5S. So that is a dedicated chip. And a good analogy to that, a friend of mine was saying she works all day, she comes home, she starts cooking dinner, and her children come in and say, hey, Mom, I need help with geography, some topic. She's like, okay, I'll do that, we'll do that later. She continues cooking dinner, and then after dinner, oh yeah, I remember, I have to help you with, forget the subject. Well, now in the 5S phone, there's actually a dedicated processor that's focused completely on tracking all of your activity. And what's really exciting about that is it's not drawing from other resources on the phone. It's actually gathering all this valuable data. To that point, Apple is going to start leveraging that data, and they're moving in a direction to an iWatch that just leverages the technology, leverages an on-the-go experience. On the culmination, the commonality side, everyone has one of these phones. My mom in her 70s has one. She knows how to use it. We are now at the brink that everyone can leverage this on-the-go experience. So to that point, what ShapeUp is doing is we're looking at our experience on the mobile app to not be simply a copy of the web experience, but that on-the-go companion experience to all the functionality that's in a wellness platform. And, extending that even further, there's things that you're going to want to do in a mobile experience that you're not going to want to do on a platform sitting at your desk. Examples, I live in Boston, so I go down to Charles River. I want to go for a 3 or 5 mile run walk. I want to reach out to my social network and say, look at this picture I just took of this beautiful spring day. Who wants to join me for this walk, this run, and get that social dynamic. And then, since we are talking about the gamification component, how do I bring that in so I have an environment which is extremely engaging and addictive? So examples there is, having a larger network where I'm getting likes and I have that attraction where I'm becoming more popular in the social network. Perhaps badges by recruiting different supporters to join me in events. Being able to issue challenges on the fly. So envision a world where you and I both have an app, we're in the same room, I challenge you right there to do something later that day. So, there's a ton of possibilities with these two things coming together. And then the final piece of that is it's an environment where push notifications can be leveraged, to improve the engagement and really excite the participant. So imagine that you're getting a notification from me that says, hey, I've seen you haven't done your steps. I'm going for a walk right now. Why don't you go ahead and do that? Imagine an environment where you have a coach and you want to reach out to your coach because you've just walked into a restaurant, you've taken a picture of the food, and you want to get that dialogue. So right now we have so much power in this environment. It's not being leveraged. It's something that ShapeUp is looking at significantly, and not only providing an environment where I can track my activity, see my progress, but actually start doing things like leveraging the accelerometer in the phone, leveraging challenges that cater to being outside of the office, being able to do those things which may correlate to a desktop web experience, but more likely will cater to that on-the-go type of experience. And when I talk about the mobile health ecosystem, there's two sides. There's the mobile apps, which I've spoken about, and then there's the devices. And on the devices side, we're seeing a plethora of devices coming out in the marketplace. Right now I have 11 devices on me. On my wrist, I've got a Nike Fuel Band, a Jawbone Up, one of the discontinued Fitbit Forces, and a Flex. And, innumerable amounts of different devices in my pocket. What's important is that we're moving from a direction that these devices are not only, clinical and serving their purpose, but they're actually becoming a style, an accessory to the individual. And that's extremely important going forward. Not only are you going to want a device that captures all the data, not only are you going to want a device that's accurate, but you're going to want one that looks good and is something that others are going to look at and say, I want one of those as well. All right, Scott, I'll hand it back to you, or I'll talk all day on this subject.
Thanks, Jack. I appreciate it. So as we move forward, how do we make gamification work? And more importantly, in a wellness environment, why is it so important? Why is it more important tomorrow even than it is today? Well, I'm sort of that poor sap who got suckered into sitting through a healthcare reform certification to become a healthcare reform expert. And what it revealed is that there are a number of new motivators that are part of this new world for each of the stakeholders. So employees want to engage more in wellness programs in this new world, especially as the costs of their health insurance and their contribution becomes more transparent. We're seeing a lot of companies leveraging that to get people to buy into wellness programs. And rather than just buying in and being transactional, they want to be engaged. So they already, millions of these guys, millions of your employees, millions of your insured already have the hardware, the Fitbits that we use, the Pebbles, the Jawbone. So they want to be engaged. So let's engage them in a way that they want to be. And insurers and brokers are seeing gamified social wellness programs as a way to sort of reach a self-selecting population who they want. So millennials have been exposed, it's a generational thing, right? So to me, because I grew up in the late 80s, it wasn't just all about neon clothing. It was about sort of games, to me, were what was making my brother overweight. It's an entirely new world, and millennials who they have to reach in order in order to attract a group that is younger, healthier, and costing less, gamification, gamified programs, social programs are what they know and what they want. And private exchanges are looking at ways to monetize wellness and get high engagement. And for instance, our program, which is sort of easier to launch than your biometric screening, is a way for them to provide, and this is an overused term, but especially for the middle market, programs that are a little bit more turnkey and easy to launch, but that are going to get 30 to 50% engagement. So everybody's motivated in new ways in this new environment to use gamified and social style wellness programs. And the incentives are changing sort of along those lines. So what we've seen from the MIT data, from Ford and from Cisco and other companies that are using gamified programs without giant financial incentives, is that economic incentives are fleeting. Daniel Pink provided plenty of evidence of that they're inferior, and MIT proved that individual rewards are inferior to group rewards, and even those are sort of inferior to social rewards. So people are motivated in different ways, but nearly everybody is driven a little bit more by a social environment and by challenges that appeal to them. So as I wrap this thing up, and I apologize for some of the earlier technical problems where you couldn't see some of my slides, so let me wrap this up with just a point about how consumers are actually driving the marketplace for us. And I mentioned a lot about the millennials already. So whether it's California with their challenges inside of a public exchange where they need to get a certain amount of the millennials in order to even make the model work, sort of works the same way for insurers out there and for employers out there. Let's engage the younger people. Let's engage people of all ages that are healthy. Let's engage everybody as opposed to focusing just on sort of the less healthy population. That can be a costly model. Let's engage the people who grew up gaming and who are used to it, and it's sort of almost like low-hanging fruit to engage these people who are young and healthy and keeping them young and healthy. And agnostic platforms are critical to us, and Jack talked a little bit about it. You can use multiple devices on many of these platforms, including ours. People don't want two devices. People love their Fitbits if they have a Fitbit. They love their Jawbone if they have a Jawbone. And then I'll conclude here by saying less stratification and more fun appeals to more people, right? Let's get the people who want to be engaged and engage them and keep them engaged, not just the unhealthy. And some of those barriers that we talked about earlier, let's lower those and make wellness easy for people to engage in, get them brought in, and as those stats showed, when people are brought into programs like a ShapeUp, they're much more susceptible to other initiatives that you're going to offer down the road. So again, I appreciate you guys tuning in. I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Meg, to wrap this up. Thanks, Meg.
Great. Thanks a lot, Scott. And that was really, really insightful. And I wanted, before we go and move into questions, I wanted to share with you some background on ShapeUp for those on the phone who are not familiar with us. Our mission is to create a healthier world by using social influence to engage people in healthy activities. To that end, we have two founders who are physicians they were in med school at Brown University, and they got the idea for ShapeUp while they were caring for individuals with a variety of obesity-related diseases, and they noticed that those who had better social networks did better on their care plans. This was back in 2006. It was when social networks were just kind of in their beginning, and they realized that there must be a place for technology to help enable existing social groups to be more effective in health and wellness. From that point, they started a nonprofit, which is known as ShapeUp Rhode Island. It was a great success. It eventually evolved into the business we have today, serving many, many employers. And we still, ShapeUp Rhode Island is still part of the ShapeUp family, and we work with this nonprofit to test our new ideas and to try new things, and also I know earlier that Scott mentioned our multiple studies that have been conducted. It's this population in which they've been conducted on. If you have any questions about those studies or about ShapeUp, you can definitely go to our website and check that out. I want to talk a little bit about our employer base as well. We serve health plans and large employers and middle market employers. And some of our accounts, most of our accounts are U.S.-based employers, and they deploy throughout the world. ShapeUp is leveraged in 128 different countries. We translate into 23 different languages right now, and we have 430 customers across the globe. 20 or more of those are Fortune 500 companies that we've worked with. And we have over 1 million participants. These participants are delighted, and I have to say it's great to work for a company where people love your product. We get a lot of terrific feedback from our participants and our employers who use ShapeUp. So wanted to provide you with a little bit of context for ShapeUp, and now I think we will transition to some questions. We just have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to hand the baton over to Sarah, I believe.
Yes. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Megan, Scott, and Jack. Great presentation. I'd now like to give all of our attendees the opportunity to ask some of our panelists some questions. So if you want to go ahead and start typing in your questions in the Q&A section, we'll start. Our first question, what have been the most successful incentive strategies that your team has seen?
I'll take this one, and maybe Jack will jump in. Well, we see a lot of different incentive strategies, and as Scott noted before, we've been doing this a long time at many large wellness-minded employers. And definitely when we first started seeing incentives, we would purely see financial. We've seen the effects of financial versus in social incentives or intrinsic incentives, and I think the most successful ones that we've seen have actually been charity-based. They've been where the organization is rallying together for a single cause. It's highly motivating, and definitely financial incentives work, particularly in an environment where the program is new, or wellness programs are new, but we've seen some really effective charity-based incentives. And Jack,
yeah, absolutely, Meg. No, everything you've said there is spot on. It's important that, you know, incentives, financial incentives are never going to go away. But one of the things that we're keen on here is looking at other types of incentives, badges, getting recognition amongst your peers. Those are things that don't have a necessary financial value to them, but to many that is extremely valuable and sometimes exceeds a financial reward. So we are in the middle of looking at a play across all of these different types of incentives to motivate the individual.
Sarah, do we have any other questions?
Yep. Can you share some of the gaming mechanics of your platform?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take that one. So what's interesting is we have, you know, I've mentioned a couple of those. Badges, for instance, is a nice motivator. But if you look at our platform, we have leaderboards that are both at the individual and team level, but then we also have these leaderboards across the company where the company is moving towards a goal. Typically we see that as a charity, and it's very motivating to the organization that they're all working together to raise a significant amount of money that's going to be given to a charity, often of their choosing as an organization, as individuals within the organization. So there's that piece of the gamification. There's a lot of components that interact between individuals, so I'm motivating a supporter in my network, and in doing so, if they accomplish something, they get that, that recognition and that reward, whether it's a badge or it's a shout out or a like on their post. And then the one last piece is a lot of our challenges, competitions, programs have components that cater to a gaming dynamic. And an example of that is we have some really exciting destination challenges where you go from destination to destination, and one of the questions we often get is, what happens at the end of that challenge? Well, there's a hidden destination or two. So there's a lot of those different types of pieces that just keeps it engaging, keeps the participants on their toes, and there's things that they want to aspire to, and then there's these other hidden gems that they can discover along the way. And obviously the social component is, hey, did you finish that challenge? Because there's actually more to it. So there's a ton of pieces there, but we find at ShapeUp that we need that component to truly have an engaging experience in the platform.
Excellent. I think we have time for two more questions. This one's a great one. When is the right time to add a gamified wellness program, for instance, in a long-term plan?
If you guys don't mind, I think I'll hop in and answer that one because I actually run into this quite often. And I think those stats that I showed earlier about 75% of people buying into the program once they were invited by somebody else, but one of the other stats there was that it makes them more susceptible or more open to joining other wellness programs. So that actually leads me to think that is sort of contrary to what a lot of companies are doing, where they have done biometric screening and they benchmark, which is always great, and then they do a program like ours and it proves after further biometrics to be productive, and that's fantastic. But budget-wise, it can sometimes be a lot easier to do a program like ShapeUp ahead of time. And what those results showed in that slide are that if you do a program like ShapeUp where it's engaging and it's fun, it can gain trust to get higher engagement in things like biometric screenings later. So I don't know that there's any perfect order, but a lot of it depends on budget, and it can sometimes be easier to do our program budgetarily first, followed by other programs, and a lot of cases that'll lead to higher engagement in your programs done after a social wellness program.
Okay, excellent. Well, we're actually out of time at this point. I'd like to, on behalf of the Corporate Health and Wellness Association and ShapeUp, we'd like to thank each and every one of you for attending today's webcast. We will be sharing the slides as well as answering any of those questions that came through that we did not have time to respond to. We will email you following the webcast as well. And a great thank you to our panelists, Megan, Scott, and Jack. And thanks everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon.